Good Wednesday morning. The votes are in. Texans have spoken. We've been keeping a close eye on all primary races, and there have been a few close ones. Some are heading to a runoff. Here to talk about the results and what this means heading into the general election is political science professor Mark Jones. Mark, good morning. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I know it was a late night for many folks out there.
That it was.
Hey, so the biggest development this morning coming in on the campaign trail is former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley ending her presidential campaign. That official announcement is expected to come in less than 30 minutes at 9 o'clock. Now that we are heading toward the general election with former President Trump, President Biden, it's a little like deja vu. But how does this election differ from 2020? Or does it?
I think one way it differs is the fact that President Trump, or better said, Biden starts off with essentially a disadvantage, and that back in 2020, his favorable ratings were positive, right, as we hit the election. It was about 10% ahead. Now Biden is underwater by about 20 points. Trump is underwater by about 10 points, and they're both 4 years older. We go back, Ronald Reagan back in 1984 when he was reelected was 74, I believe, or 73. And at that time we thought that was old. Biden now is, 81. So we're in a situation where you have two relatively unpopular presidential candidates, but who are going to be their nominees. And so voters are, I think back in 2020, felt they were given two alternatives that they didn't particularly like. They like them even less right now.
Yeah, we have older and oldest. I know I was listening to a victory speech given by former President Trump last night, and he was talking about uniting the GOPs, uniting the Republican Party, and a lot of critics saying that's not going to happen on his watch. How does he move forward, being that those constituents are so polarized by the options they've been presented with?
Well, I think, his focal point then as he goes into the election will be hammering on Biden and raising doubts about his ability to serve 4 years, and the fact that maybe you would be electing his vice presidential candidate, most likely Kamala Harris, will be the de facto president. We know Harris is the only candidate who is less popular than Biden. And the other thing Trump will try to do is mobilize his base. At this point, I think it's such a hyper-polarized election where people are essentially focused on one side or the other, that we're going to see a real concentration of efforts not to win over swing voters, but rather to mobilize your base to get turnout as high as possible. I think that's the route Trump will take. I think we're looking at a very close election in the fall of 2024 that'll effectively boil down to about a half dozen battleground states, places like Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That's where the election will be decided.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting few months ahead, that's for sure. Okay, one major race, Texas's 18th congressional district. We're talking about Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee versus former city council member Amanda Edwards. This was the difference of a few thousand votes. I believe it was closer to maybe 10,000 votes in total. But what does this tell you about Sheila Jackson Lee's journey to the general election in November?
Oh, well, this is Congressional District 18 is a very safe district. That means that Congresswoman Jackson Lee will be returning to Congress for a 16th term in January of 2025. There's no doubt about that. She exceeded expectations. In part, Amanda Edwards was not able to simultaneously turn out new voters in Congressional District 18 and peel off some of the loyal supporters of Congresswoman Jackson Lee, who Edwards hoped would say now is time for a change.
Yeah.
Apparently, for most of the voters, it's not time for a change.
Which is so fascinating to me because, when we talk about change, oftentimes that revolves around age, right? And when we see the presidential race with two candidates who are well into their 80s, then we have a local race with a congressional district. We have one older candidate and one younger candidate, but that younger candidate cannot pull it off. Age is always a wild card to me in some regard.
Well, part of it also has to do with the primary electorate. We won't have the numbers for a few weeks, but more likely than not, the average Democratic voter in that district was over the age of 60.
Yeah. Okay, one major shakeup here at home, the race for Harris County District Attorney. Sean Teare beat incumbent Kim Ogg, some calling this a blowout defeat for Ogg.
Right. The writing was always on the wall for the past, I'd say, 6 months. Ogg has been increasingly unpopular with Harris County Democrats. And at the end of the day, the people who voted in this primary were almost exclusively Harris County Democrats. And so as a result, Teare was able to defeat her by about 50 points.
Okay. Mark Jones, always a pleasure catching up with you. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.